Hello, welcome to the 225 Literary and Jury Charge. We're going to start off with an excerpt from Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. This is on Create Patience Practice Periods. All right. Here we go. Ready? Patience is a quality of heart that can be greatly enhanced with deliberate practice. An effective way that I have found to deepen my own patience is to create actual practice periods of time that I set up in my mind to practice the art of patience. Life itself becomes a classroom, and the curriculum is patience. You can start with as little as 5 minutes and build up your capacity for patience over time. Start by saying to yourself, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I won't allow myself to be bothered by anything. I'll be patient. What you'll discover is truly amazing. Your attention to be patient, especially if you know it's only for a short while, immediately strengthens your capacity for patience. Patience is one of those special qualities where success feeds on itself. Once you reach little milestones, 5 minutes of successful patience, you'll begin to see that you do indeed have the capacity to be patient, even for longer periods of time. Over time, you may even become a patient person. Once or since I have young children at home, I have many possibilities to practice the art of patience. For example, on a day when both girls are firing questions at me as I'm trying to make important phone calls, I'll say to myself, now is a great time to be patient. For the next half hour, I'm going to be as patient as possible. See, I've worked hard. I'm up to 30 minutes. All kidding aside, it really works, and it has worked in our family. As I keep my cool and don't allow myself to be annoyed and upset, I can calmly yet firmly direct my children's behavior far more effectively than when I get crazy. The simple act of gearing my mind toward patience allows me to remain in the present moment far more than I would be if I were upset, thinking about all the times that this has happened before and feeling like a martyr. What's more, my patient feelings are often contagious. They rub off on the kids, who then decide on their own that it's no fun to bother Dad. Being patient allows me to keep my perspective. I can remember, even in the midst of a difficult situation, that what's before me, my present challenge, isn't life or death, but simply a minor obstacle that must be dealt with. Without patience, the same scenario can become a major emergency, complete with yelling, frustration, hurt feelings, and high blood pressure. It's really not worth all of that. Whether you're needing to deal with your children, your boss, or a difficult person or situation, if you don't want to sweat the small stuff, improving your patience level is a great way to start. All right. I've got some jury charge here. This is on impeaching a witness. You're going to hear authored, impeach, Susan, merely, Lori Englebrook, Rayburn, language, Nathaniel, orange, Beverly Young, Kirk Taylor, substantial, Gregory T. Conrad, and verbatim. All right. Here we go. I will read this at 200. Your Honor, this is verbatim. This is the report of September 11, 2013. This report is authored by Deputy Gregory T. Conrad and Kirk J. Taylor. Quote, while at the location, a Mrs. Beverly Young, female, age 45, at 11278 Orange Street, phone number 992-1180, contacted us and stated that she often talked with the victim, Susan Nathaniel. Mrs. Young further stated that an unknown male who lives somewhere in the neighborhood had been bothering the victim by asking her for dates. Mrs. Young said that the victim would not identify the male, but merely said that she would be surprised if she, Mrs. Young, knew who it was. The unknown male had been calling Susan Nathaniel since the death of her husband. Mrs. Young advised us that the victim stated that she would never date this male because she feared him, explaining that he was crazy, unquote. Now, as an officer of the court, Your Honor, I would like to explain to the court that when I interviewed Mrs. Young myself, she indicated the following, that she was not interviewed specifically at the murder site. By that I mean the Nathaniel residence. She indicated she, Lori Englebrook, and Mrs. Rayburn, and another unknown female who she does not know by name, were apparently talking near the corner, and the deputy approached them. She, Mrs. Young, told me that she did not make the following statement to the deputy, quote, who lives somewhere in the neighborhood, unquote. She said that Mrs. Nathaniel did not specifically point out this individual who was making the phone calls to be living somewhere in the neighborhood. She further told me that Mrs. Nathaniel did not tell her that this individual was asking her for dates. Mrs. Young further told me that Mrs. Nathaniel did not say, quote, would not identify, but apparently Susan Nathaniel told her, quote, could not identify the male. Mrs. Young further told me that the following language, quote, she merely said that she would be surprised if she, Mrs. Young, knew who it was. The male had been calling her since the death of her, meaning Susan Nathaniel's husband, end of quote. Mrs. Young said she did not recall saying that to the deputy who interviewed her. Obviously, there are substantial differences between what Mrs. Young is telling me and what Mrs. Young told the deputy sheriff on the date. I would suggest, Your Honor, that I believe that I can impeach my own witness. All right. We've got some literary, and the subject is patents and copyrights. All right. You're going to hear intelligence, author, composer, designer, artist, infringement, monetary, injunction, inventor, copyright, registered. Okay, and you're also going to hear substantial, and the brief for that is STANL. Here we go. Ready? A substantial number of individuals, businesses, and corporations find it necessary to secure patents or copyrights. A patent is the registered right of the inventor to make, use, and sell his invention. A patent is valid for the period of 17 years. The patent application should be filled out carefully. There is a small filing fee which must accompany the application. A suit for patent infringement by any other may be brought. Such suits are costly and time-consuming. However, if an infringement can be proved, monetary damages and an injunction are available. A copyright is the registered right of an author, composer, designer, or artist to reproduce, publish, and sell their works, books, music, art, and other original material, which are the result of the skill and intelligence of the creator. Copyrights are granted for a period of 28 years and may be renewed for a second 28-year period. The holder of a copyright may sue anyone for damages who violates that copyright. Copyrights may be held by individuals or by a company, such as a publishing company. All right. I've got some legal terms, and I'm going to read this one time at 200 and again at 225. All right. Here we go. You're going to hear individuals, jurors, presence, verbatim, defendant, clerk, administers, I said verbatim, testimony, plaintiff, swears, bailiff, attendance, courtroom, colloquy, record, oath. I'm going to read this once at 200 and again at 225. Here we go. There are several individuals in the courtroom at the time of trial. These include not only the judge, the attorneys, the plaintiff, and the defendant, but also the witnesses and several other individuals whose presence is necessary. The clerk of the court keeps a record of each case that is tried. The clerk administers the oath to the jurors and swears in each of the witnesses. The bailiff or other courtroom attendants maintain order in the courtroom and remain on call to assist the judge in carrying on the business of the court. The court reporter records verbatim all testimony and colloquy. All right, so again at 225. There are several individuals in the courtroom at the time of trial. These include not only the judge, the attorneys, the plaintiff, the defendant, and the witnesses, but several other individuals whose presence is necessary. The clerk of the court keeps a record of each case that is tried. The clerk administers the oath to the jurors and swears in each of the witnesses. The bailiff or other courtroom attendants maintain order in the courtroom and remain on call to assist the judge in carrying on the business of the court. The court reporter records verbatim all testimony and colloquy. First time was at 200 and then again at 225. Okay. got an article here called Secrets of Survivors. The trials of life are far less important than how one deals with them. Here are the secrets of survivors. Here we go. Ready? Ellen seemed to have it all. She was active in the community, married to a college professor, and the mother of 2 grown children. Then Ted, her husband, was felled by a massive stroke that affected his balance and left him barely able to speak intelligibly. Unable to afford institutional care, Ellen brought him home. Ellen's world had fallen apart, but she did not succumb. Instead, she devised ingenious ways to help her husband adapt to life in a wheelchair and wrote a book about their experience to give courage to others in similar straits. Above all, she made sure Ted was still part of life by taking him to concerts, plays, and even on a Caribbean cruise. She taught him to walk a little, to speak more clearly, and together they continued to dream of a lifelong planned trip to Australia. Sydney was brought up on Cat Island in the Bahamas. At age 16, with only a year and a half of schooling and $3 in his pocket, he moved to New York City. There he slept at first on a rooftop and got a job as a dishwasher. Although he knew nothing about acting, Sidney responded to a want ad listed by the African American Theater. When he couldn't read all the words in the script, the director interrupted his audition and said, "Stop wasting my time." The young man walked away more determined than ever. He bought a radio and for hours listened to people's voices trying to enunciate as clearly as they did. At the restaurant where he worked, he found a waiter who helped him learn to read better. Later, Sidney went back to the African American Theater and persuaded officials to let him take acting lessons. He resolved to become not only the best black actor in the world, but the best actor. He is Sidney Poitier, and he has come a long way toward fulfilling that ambition. These are survivors, people who find themselves in tough circumstances, and bravery overcomes them. They are struck down by illness and catastrophe, assailed by grief and failure, treated unfairly or betrayed, yet they not only survive, they confront their stresses and sorrows in ways that deepen their lives. They go on with grace, distinction, and courage. Researchers have discovered that the trials of life are far less important than how one deals with them. People who survive begin learning to do so long before crises appear. By adopting their special outlook on life, we can all learn to be survivors. Make happiness a habit. The survivor says life, even when troubles spring up like thistles in a weed patch. He takes each day as it comes, full of sorrow, joy, disappointment, and surprise. When he can't have the big victory, he accepts small ones, and he seems to know where to look for the flash of excitement, the moment of beauty and insight. Even concentration camp survivors told of small pleasures, a glowing sunset, a raspberry by the road where they worked, an evening when, though exhausted, they stayed awake to watch the moonlight drift through the trees. Terrence DePrey, a former Colgate University professor who studied the attitudes of Holocaust victims, calls his tenacious hold on life a strength beyond hope, as stubborn as the upsurge of spring. A woman I know was told that by her doctor that she had bone cancer that could be fatal. Instead of surrendering to the sickness, she began traveling to one exotic country after another. She bought theater tickets and magazine subscriptions. At nearly 80, she remarried. She has far exceeded her doctor's expectations, and she says there are not enough hours in the day to do the things she wants to do. Survivors have a kind of talent for life, a fury to use all of it. They treasure the time that is. They find each day's joys, however small. Suffering, says psychologist Nathaniel Braden, is just about the easiest of human activities. Being happy is just about the hardest. It is true. No one is born happy. Everyone makes his own happiness. Accept change. Most of us would like nothing better than to blame someone else when troubles come, but the survivor will have none of that. Change and problems will come whether we want them to or not. In my own life, it comforts me to remember that as I approached each unthinkable catastrophe, it became thinkable. So accept change, not with resignation, but with a fierce longing to learn from it. When our lives explode, they come together in new patterns. What looks like disaster may turn out to be the best thing that ever happens to us. Don't give up. Despite being afraid or blocked by obstacles, the survivor quietly does what has to be done, no matter how overwhelming the odds against him are. Bill Gargan's voice was the prime tool of his trade, which was acting. Then he got cancer and lost his larynx. At first, he was in despair, but you can't spend your life feeling sorry for yourself, he said. So he worked for years to learn to talk again until he could finally make speeches. Then he spent the rest of his life helping others like himself. Trying will not always make a catastrophe go away, but it will make it more endurable and provide immense satisfaction. Don't ask, did I fail? Ask, what do I do next? Reach out to others. Recently, I encountered a cab driver who was particularly warm and friendly, helping me with books and parcels. I thanked him and asked if he enjoyed his work. Not right now, he replied, explaining that his young wife had just been killed in an accident only a week before. I marveled at his courtesy in the face of such pain. He simply said, "It's not your fault my wife is dead. Why should I take it out on you?" The survivor cherishes involvement with others. Though he readily asks for help when it is really needed, he does not take out his woes on others. Rather, he believes his own troubles help him understand the hard times of others. The survivor is a giver. The real value of love, wrote Paul Valery, is the increased vitality it produces. Duke University researchers found that one of the best predictors of health, happiness, and long life was a tendency to reach out to people beyond your immediate family. When your woes threaten to overcome you, think about how you can help someone else. Live in the present. I know a woman, now in her 60s, whose childhood was so miserable that she is still sunk in self-pity. She has not been able to keep a job or maintain a close relationship. Life lies in letting go, in giving up your grievances, wrote Mildred Newman and Bernard Burke in How to Be Your Own Best Friend. And they warned that if we spend our energies being angry with people who once disappointed us, we won't have any left over for what we need now. Not one of us can bring back yesterday or shape tomorrow, adds Frederick Buechner in The Hungering Dark. Only today is ours, and it will not be ours for long. And once it is gone, it will never in all time be ours again. Don't be afraid to dream. Terry King went blind after a shell burst in his face while he was in combat training for Vietnam. He lived near the water and had always longed for a cabin cruiser. Unable to afford one, he decided to build one himself. But how could a blind man build a boat? King found a volunteer from the Blind Service Association who was willing to record a book on boat building. After listening to the recordings, Terry eventually managed to build a 33-foot cabin cruiser in his backyard. Though he would always need someone to pilot it, he was happy because building the boat was the biggest challenge I could meet. In The Will to Live, Dr. Arnold Hutchinson writes, people go about their task without weariness if they take a goal and believe in it and what they're doing. The survivor's life jacket is made of the imperishable things with which he surrounds himself: books, music, spiritual faith, purpose, and dreams. Long ago I read a haunting line whose author I have forgotten. I tried to walk without a dream and I fell down. It is not easy to be a survivor, but it is always worth the effort. If we can live on in our lives well in suffering, hardship, and failure, if we can use all of our talents and courage, then something of great worth will emerge and be added to the common good. This longing to beat the odds, to conquer our own weakness, has carried humanity through its long history. It is the cry of the heroic in all of us. It's one of my favorite stories. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, so we've got time for one more. Sorry, somebody just came in. Wasn't expecting that. Okay, so I have one more thing that I'm going to read you. This is called Congressional Record in Mourning. So you're going to hear representatives: Calvin Theodore, Hawthorne, Seattle, Washington, Progressive, Delegation, Aggressive, Humble, Victor, Sympathy, Zest, Merited, Ways and Means, Environment, Equal Rights, and Coastal. Now, I have to say that was my husband that walked in and he didn't know I was doing a class, and I almost screamed because it scared me, so sorry about that. All right, here we go. I'm going to read this at 180. Mr. Speaker, last Tuesday at the age of 89, one of our former colleagues who was a strong and determined man passed away. Calvin Theodore Ted Hawthorne of Seattle, Washington will long be remembered in these chambers. Ted served as a member of the House of Representatives for more than a quarter of a century. He presided as chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He introduced progressive civil rights legislation. He supported the Equal Rights Amendment, and he worked closely with the governor of the state of Washington to protect the coastal environment. When I first came to the House, Ted was one of the first persons that I met. He encouraged me to speak out on the issues that made my blood boil. He enlisted my advice and aid on several of his pet projects. He wasn't content to sit and watch. He was aggressive, yet a good listener. Ted Hawthorne never lost his zest for living. After his retirement from the House in 2007, his political life did not stop. Ted ran for the office of City Council member in Seattle. Although he was defeated on election night, he offered his full services to the victor. Since Ted's passing, I have realized how important it is to recognize the special needs of all groups. Sometimes we are so caught up in our own problems and strategies that we overlook the needs of others whose attention is merited. Indeed, we will miss Calvin Theodore Hawthorne. We will remember his contributions to the state of Washington and to the American people. On behalf of the members of the State of Washington delegation, I would like to extend our sincere sympathy to the family of Calvin Theodore Hawthorne. All right, and that concludes our literary and jury charge for the 225 class.